All right, well, welcome everybody to our first of the year, January 2024. Yay, happy and what am I saying? Happy New Year. An anniversary of this group to some degree. We are now recording. I have to remind myself all these important things. We have all these wonderful people joining us in person. And those of you who didn't make it and watch on YouTube, remember, you too can do this. You just have to email me or contact me on Facebook, and you too can log in and be part of this happy throng. Because today we are so fortunate to have one of the wittiest persons that I know, Wolf Forrest, and you don't have to be witty, I'm not putting you on the spot. Wolf Forrest was a great fan of Edgar Allan Poe, who was actually born in the hometown of Edgar Allan Poe, Baltimore.
No, he died there.
Well, he died, sorry, the death town of Edgar Allan Poe, which is more appropriate anyway. And he also has a cat named.
It's all my introduction.
It's all in his
introduction. It's all my introduction.
All right, don't jump down my throat, Wolf. Yes, we know. All right. Take it easy. Simmer, chill. All right, so back to what I was saying, whatever that was. Okay, Wolf is a lifelong student and like lifelong learning. He's done things for them too, the Ollie program of Edgar Allan Poe. And I know he has numerous artifacts around his house. He has read not dozens, but hundreds of books about Poe. He's a very rigorous historian and researcher, but he also has, because I had to flip through them really quickly, a lot of slides to cover. So I know he'll do it in a judicious fashion. And with those wonderful words of introduction, I will let Wolf introduce himself while I run and get him some water.
I got my water.
Oh, you got your water?
That.
Okay, he thought of that too.
Maybe I should here on the coaster.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna put let's see, I have to hit something with share screen. Let me do multiple participants just in case we need that, but I don't think we need that. All right, and here we go. We're going to share screen and make Poe visible to all and put it into slideshow mode, which should happen because I'm doing that. I don't know why it's not going into slideshow mode. It will, and I'm going to minimize our thumbnails to get rid of them. And there. Now you will see that, Wolf. I'm just cluing our speaker in.
Can they see it?
They can't see it.
No, I want them to see it.
They can't, no, I'm talking about the controls.
Oh.
You can see the controls.
All right. How do I advance this?
Oh,
just the regular button like this?
Wait.
I don't want to do it yet. But...
Let me show you. You can advance with, I think, just clicking this.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But then how do we get back? Is it that way? No.
I'd rather use this.
Okay, use that. Well, that doesn't work. Don't use that. Use this. Wait, previous. Oh, look, it's giving you previous. Let's see. So let's see how we did that. Okay, so it's these two, down page and up page.
All right, gotcha.
I'll get some water.
I got some water.
For me.
Oh, you, okay. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, all righty then. Well, greetings everyone and Happy New Year. Today is also Epiphany, if you observe the Christian calendar, which marks the end of the 12 days of Christmas. I had my own epiphany when doing research for this presentation. I've been a fan of Edgar Allan Poe for a long time, and I thought I knew him pretty well. I was born in Baltimore where Poe died, and like Poe, I'm a lover of cats. My two companions are named Edgar and Raven, and I brought them home in 2019 on October the 7th, the anniversary of Poe's death. Much of what we think we know of Poe has been shrouded in mystery and error. Even his end is not known. What medical science at the time diagnosed as either brain fever, congestion of the brain, or cerebral inflammation is not enough for modern physicians to properly evaluate. Poe could have succumbed to anything from epilepsy to tubercular meningitis to rabies. And so it goes. With that, I'm going to start our presentation now. I hope you can all see the first slide, Edgar Allan Poe, from the macabre to the metaphysical, which is the title of this presentation. In less than 2 weeks, we will be celebrating Poe's 215th birthday on January the 19th. Poe is familiar as a man of letters and the premier American writer of horror fiction in the 19th century, although Nathaniel Hawthorne, Washington Irving, Henry James, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and others certainly contributed. While he was penning tales of madness, premature burial, cursed houses, rampant pestilence, and torture, he also found time to prognosticate on the technological trends of his time and come up with interesting results. But his romanticized biography pictures him as a wild-eyed, mad, alcoholic genius. And while the genius part is true, Poe was measured and diligent in his craft, and his sense of humor was well evidenced by his peers. He considered himself a poet and critic above all else, and the other sensational aspects of his writing were just as his expansive creativity flexing its muscle. He was born in 1809, just 24 days before two other highly rational thinkers both brought into this world on February 12th, Abraham Lincoln and Charles Darwin. It is a truth universally acknowledged that Edgar Allan Poe was a master of the macabre and horror writer extraordinaire, but also the progenitor of the modern detective story. And there is one more branch of genre fiction where Poe's contributions are not as popularly known in the genre we know today as science fiction. No less an author than science fantasist Thomas M. Dish, author of The Brave Little Toaster, The Genocides, and Camp Concentration, called him the first science fiction writer. In his acclaimed and award-winning nonfiction 1999 book, The Dreams Our Stuff Is Made Of, How Science Fiction Conquered the World, Dish refers to Poe as, quote, the source, while the SF author, critic, and historian Adam Roberts, writing about Poe in his 2006 book, The History of Science Fiction, notes that, quote, a significant portion, perhaps a fifth of his output, was science fiction, and this includes some of his very best work. But there have been critics. An anonymous article in the Saturday Review titled Science and Romance disparagingly referred to Poe as, quote, probably the father of that pseudo-science fiction which still has its living practitioners in Dr. Conan Doyle and Mr. H.G. Wells. So, which are these SF works of Edgar Allan Poe that make a case for him to be considered one of the fathers of modern science fiction? The editor and pioneering publisher, Hugo Gernsback, after whom the annual Hugo Awards are named, and yet another person described as the father of science fiction, while credited with coining the term science fiction, he preferred another term, scientifiction, to refer to the genre, and this is how he described it. By scientifiction, I mean the Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, and Edgar Allan Poe type of story. In fact, the first issue of the first magazine dedicated to science fiction, Gernsback's Amazing Stories, contains reprints of 6 science fiction stories, including one by Edgar Allan Poe. If you'll notice that Poe's middle name is misspelled on this cover. Poe was 9 years old when Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was published in 1818. It sparked a renewed interest in galvanism in the general public, which extended to parlor games and self-applied experiments. During Poe's short life of 40 years, 11 elements were discovered, the planet Neptune was discovered, Cornelius Vanderbilt began his career in transportation, the relationship between electricity and magnetism was established, the speed of light was measured, and the daguerreotype and telegraph were invented, both of which figured in Poe's fiction. Mesmerism, an early form of hypnosis, was also in vogue, and named after Franz Mesmer, a German physician with an interest in astronomy. Poe's early interest in science also included the heavens, after having read James Ferguson's 1819 edition of An Easy Introduction to Astronomy for Young Gentlemen and Ladies. Poe moved to Boston where, at age 18, he published his first book of verse, Tamerlane and Other Poems, in 1827. It was a slim affair, drew little attention, and made no money at all for its nearly destitute author. Poe's interest in science may not be all that surprising when his aptitude for math, demonstrated during his time at West Point, was revealed. The 21-year-old poet entered the academy in March of 1830. Well-schooled and quick-witted, he excelled at classwork, particularly in French. Here's a portrait of the young Edgar Allan Poe by Samuel Osgood. Poe left West Point in 1831 and moved to Baltimore, and in 1833 submitted what would be the prize-winning entry in a contest sponsored by the Baltimore Saturday Visitor, launching Poe's writing career, and was an early attempt at science fiction. Titled Manuscript Found in a Bottle, it features a skeptical man of science sailing from Sumatra who was shipwrecked, boarding another vessel manned by superhuman sailors on a trance-like mission, and guided by instruments unknown to him. They are bound for some date with destiny as they approach a whirlpool. Again, there is a comparison to Frankenstein. Think of the doctor on the ice floes, with resolute factuality butting heads with wild supernatural events. Poe's skepticism at the junk science of the day includes a reference to John Cleese Sims and Jeremiah Reynolds' hollow earth theory. In June 1835, Poe produced The Unparalleled Adventures of One Hans Pfaall, telling a story of an impoverished bellows mender who escaped his creditors by building a balloon and flying to the moon, whereas in Melanta Tauta, translated as These Things Are in the Future, Poe satirizes a 19th century society from the viewpoint of a balloonist in the year 2848. Now, balloon travel was not in and of itself a futuristic concept. The Montgolfier brothers demonstrated its viability in the 1790s, and Jules Verne would one day pen his own balloon tales, Around the World in 80 Days and 5 Weeks in a Balloon. But Poe was the first to suggest its capacities as an adventure machine. Adam Roberts called it the key piece of Poe's science fiction, which shows Poe at his imaginative best. Written as a hoax, and read only as such to its great detriment, Hans Pfaall, when read as a science fiction text that is one of the earliest journey to the moon tales of that age, brings together all the elements that make for a good science fiction story. Adventure, space travel, strange aliens, told through the point of view of the protagonist, the titular Hans Pfaall, who travels to our lunar neighbor. The story contains just enough scientific verisimilitude, given what was known at the time, with its details of the vacuum of space, how Pfaall overcomes it, to its descriptions of the moon and its inhabitants, to make a case for Poe's science fiction taking root in science and then soaring skywards with its intuition, imagination, and fictional extrapolations. In the years to come, the unparalleled adventure of one Hans Pfaall would influence many a writer, not the least Jules Verne, who referenced the story in his own immortal tale. Poe's later tale, The Balloon Hoax, inspired Verne again. In 1822, Charles Babbage had constructed a model of his difference engine, number 1, considered the first functioning computer, a special purpose calculating machine far more complex than any that had previously been conceived, designed to compute mathematical tables by the method of finite differences and to print the results. In early 1836, Poe had seen exhibited in Richmond, Virginia, inventor Wolfgang von Kempelen's The Turk, a mechanical chess player that had wowed audiences since 1770 and was now owned by showman Johann Maisel, who toured with the device around the country. In April, Poe published an article entitled Maisel's Chess Player in the Southern Literary Messenger from Richmond. In this article on automata, Poe exposed the hoax and provided a very closely reasoned explanation of the concealed human operation of von Kempelen's Turk. Poe also briefly compared von Kempelen's Turk to Babbage's difference engine number 1, which was limited to the computation of short mathematical tables, suggesting essentially that if the Turk was fully automated and had the ability to use the results of one logical operation to make a decision about the next one, what was later called conditional branching, it would be far superior to Babbage's machine. This feature Babbage later designed into his analytical engine. A must-read is Poe's 1838 story, The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, his only complete novel-length work that tells the tale of one Arthur Pym, a stowaway on a ship. Partly autobiographical and narrated as a first-person account, what begins as an adventure at sea soon turns into something much more involving, including cannibalism, until Pym is saved by the crew of another ship, which then leads them to encountering mysterious islands, strange lands, and stranger cultures around the South Pole before ending abruptly. But not before touching upon the hollow earth theory, a theme which we have mentioned occurs in another Poe short story, manuscript found in a bottle. In Pym, the unnamed narrator finds himself in bizarre circumstances as a passenger upon a ship, whose subsequent capsizing leads to supernatural happenings of horror, the moorings of which are scientific extrapolations as Edgar Allan Poe saw them. As an admirer and reader of Poe's fiction, Jules Verne, bothered by the fact that the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket seemed incomplete due to its abrupt ending, would go on to write a sequel, An Antarctic Mystery, also translated as The Sphinx of the Ice Realm. Nearly 100 years later, H.P. Lovecraft would also use this Poe narrative as the inspiration for his own Antarctic adventure at the Mountains of Madness. The Conversation of Iros and Charmian, published in December of 1839, is a post-apocalyptic short story about Earth's encounter with a comet and our planet's subsequent destruction brought about by too much oxygen in the atmosphere. It is the first of what may be called Poe's Platonic dialogues between spirits in heaven. The others are the Colloquy of Manos and Una and The Power of Words. As a response to Baptist minister William Miller's prediction of the end of the world, beginning with lectures in 1831 on said demise in 1843, and exacerbated by the appearance of Halley's Comet in 1835, coinciding with the birth of Mark Twain, who would conveniently and mysteriously die when the comet would appear again in 1910. Two souls in heaven are discussing the recent apocalypse of such a comet. Iros, who died in the apocalypse, explains the circumstances to Charmian, who died 10 years previously, and now must embrace this new phase of existence. It's possible that Poe may have read the astronomer Camille Flammarion's 1893 apocalypse novel, Omega, The Last Days of the World. In February of 1841, as an editor, Poe referenced again, in the improbably named Graham's Ladies and Gentlemen's Magazine, chess-playing Turk and the ability of machines to mimic human thought, stating, quote, "It may be roundly asserted that human ingenuity cannot concoct a cipher which human ingenuity cannot resolve," unquote. The French developed a particular affinity for Poe, his works being early translation subjects, and a feat for visual artists. Perhaps it was Poe's master detective C. Auguste Dupin, himself French, which captured their fancy. He was introduced in Murders in the Rue Morgue, published in 1841, and dealing with several murders committed by a highly evolved orangutan who witnessed its owner shaving with a straight razor. Dupin's obsessive intellect and rational dissection of deductive reasoning became the template for Sherlock Holmes and others to follow. Among the first people to acknowledge Poe's status as the creator of the scientific novel was Jules Verne, one of the two people from that era most commonly referred to as the fathers of modern science fiction, the other being H.G. Wells, when he referred to Poe as le créateur du roman merveilleux scientifique. Verne would also write that it is possibly the first piece of fan fiction regarding Poe's output. Poe's science fiction inspired this lithograph by artist Paul Gauguin entitled The Drama of the Sea. He was also a favorite of the lithographer Odilon Redon, who interpreted his balloon hoax and Poe's poem, The Bells. Poe's science writing danced back and forth between genres, sometimes explaining, sometimes fictionalizing by using science for dramatic effect. While working for magazines in Richmond, Philadelphia, and New York, Poe published clear-eyed evaluations of scientific and technical developments, One of his best-selling works was an introduction to conchology, the science of shells. His fictional stories also frequently turned on scientific facts and theories, with fluid mechanics and natural history underwriting his May 1841 nautical thriller, A Descent into the Maelstrom. An old man on the summit of a mountain in Norway recounts an ordeal as his ship was pulled into a whirlpool, where he witnessed at first a terrible event. Then the beauty of its power overwhelmed him as he saw objects of different sizes being sucked into the vortex at different speeds. It's not unlike the account contemporary scientists imagine as objects approaching the singularity of a black hole as they are drawn to its inevitable conclusion. Containing elements of Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, a poem which also inspired Mary Shelley in her novel Frankenstein, Maelstrom also references manuscript found in a bottle, whereby Poe acknowledges the power of natural forces. In August of 1841, Poe published The Colloquy of Manos and Una, another of his imaginative excursions beyond the board of mortality, and in this sense it belongs with his other stories of burial and resurrection. It's formally presented as a dialogue between two spirits in the afterlife who were lovers or married when they were alive. Manos, which is the Greek masculine form of one, was the first to die. Apparently, he has memories of Una, Latin feminine form of one, grieving at his funeral ceremonies. Now he seems to be explaining the afterlife to her. Poe's estimation of the growth of the American empire was foretold in this tale with a bleak outcome and the destruction of nature via industrial expansion. Eureka, however, which followed in 1848, is a counteractive essay, being that the cosmos was alive with thought and passion based on leaps of intuition and ingenuity. Although Poe's tale, The Pit and the Pendulum, first published in 1842 in the literary annual The Gift, A Christmas and New Year's Present for 1843, is considered horror and not science fiction, it applies the parameter of machines as an extension of a human's bidding, in the case of torture instruments to exact revenge. So much so that it may have been the inspiration for Franz Kafka's 1914 short story, In the Penal Colony. In 1844, A Tale of the Ragged Mountains appeared in Godey's Lady's Book. It's basically a disembodied time travel experience and the only one of his stories to be set in Virginia and told in the present but set in November 1827. The Ragged Mountains lie southwest of Charlottesville, and the traveler encountered a thick and peculiar mist and trees not native to Virginia. The narrator tells the story of Bedloe, who is the reincarnation of his Dr. Templeton's Fred Oldeb, who died in 1780 fighting alongside Warren Hastings and a group of British soldiers in India. Poe's obsession with the limits of empirical science was a quality he shared with the mesmerists of his day, and its connection to the shadowy relation between matter and spirit. Bedloe experiences the shock of a galvanic battery and returns to his original self, minds communicating across space and time. The colonial repression of British against Indians reflects America's treatment of its own Indians, and this mirroring extends to the fact that Bedloe is a mirror image anagram of Oldeb. In that same month, the balloon hoax appeared in the New York Sun, whose publisher, Richard Locke, had published 9 years earlier another hoax about the discovery of life on the moon. Hoax was written as a scathing jab on Locke, whom Poe accused of plagiarizing his earlier story, The Unparalleled Adventures of One Hans Pfaall, and announcing the crossing of the Atlantic in only 3 days in a balloon. Today, are we subjected to a variety of internet ruses more sophisticated than the 19th century reader was ever privy to, but this one was notorious in capturing the public's fancy. The New York Sun played a hoax on its own readers by presenting Poe's tall tale of a steering balloon as if it were a true event. The article announced, quote, "The great problem is at length solved. The air, as well as the earth and the ocean, have been subdued by science and would become a common and convenient highway for mankind," unquote. 4 months later, in August, Mesmeric Revelation appeared in Columbian's Ladies and Gentlemen's magazine. It would be another work of Poe translated by the French poet Charles Baudelaire in 1848. Anticipating the clinical methods adopted by Sigmund Freud, Poe satirizes the quality of suspended animation or death in life. Poe debunked spiritualism and in 1845 attended a series of lectures by Andrew Jackson Davis in New York, who dictated, while in a trance, his principles of nature. His Divine Revelations and A Voice to Mankind was published in 1847. Both sermon and science fiction, Poe's story was in effect a prelude to Eureka. In February of 1845, The 1002nd Tale of Scheherazade, a science fantasy tale written as a humorous continuation to 1001 Nights, which, in keeping with the spirit of its inspiration, mentions many fantastical wonders, including von Kempelen's chess-playing automaton and Charles Babbage's difference engine. It's another satirical tale about the public's giddy reaction to American expansion and progress. Now concentrating on locales within the United States, Poe's writing demonstrated an ingenuity of economy. This new Arabian Nights tale lampooned technical feats and fabulous wonders and made the United States a land of powerful magicians. The sequel, if you will, allows Poe to delve into such mysteries as Sinbad makes his 8th and final voyage, and all mysteries are variations of scientific wonders that occurred before or during Poe's lifetime. The king to whom the tales are told is intrigued, except for the obvious fabrication of the earth being held up by a blue cow with 400 horns. And of course, the now skeptical king has Scheherazade executed the next day. Some Words with a Mummy appeared in the 1845 issue of American Whig Review, that's W-H-I-G, not W-I-G, about the scientific revival of a long-interred Egyptian mummy. In a nod to Frankenstein, this satire, whereby a mummy is revived with electricity and thus begins a spirited debate about whose time was better, the men or the mummies. The mummy's name is Alamastachio. The pharaoh maintains his society was well versed in chemistry, astronomy, artesian wells, steam power, and architecture, and only fell short to modern civilization in the areas of democracy and quack medicine. Here's another illustration from an 1852 British publication. The Power of Words was published in the June 1845 issue of United States Magazine and Democratic Review. The latest of Poe's 3 imaginary dialogues of blessed spirits in heaven is usually considered the best. Like the conversation of Eros and Charmian, it is laid in the future after the destruction of the world. The piece was discussed enthusiastically by C. Alfonso Smith in Poe, How to Know Him, who explained that Agathos inducts Oinos into the methods of creation by a leap of fantasy over the walls of analytic reason. Briefly, The Power of Words is a leap of fantasy over the walls of analytic reason. It's a prose poem with various philosophical concerns. Poe faced in this story the problem of creation and took the position that God created only in the beginning. Through the conversation of Oinos and Agathos, he depicted the future life where the soul's unquenchable desire to know is recognized as its greatest happiness, and therefore the soul's search for knowledge is never ceasing. He also expressed the idea of the conversation of force in poetic terms. As no thought can perish, so no act is without infinite result. Since every vibration once set in motion is eternal, the power of the word once spoken is also everlasting. When Oinos speaks to Agathos about his weeping and drooping wings as they hover above a star, seen as the greenish and most terrible, Poe is referencing the discovery of the orbits of a double star, the smaller of which appears greenish or bluish, by Sir William Herschel, the discoverer of Uranus in 1781. Poe reinvokes the spirit of Charles Babbage, who claimed that every act in motion makes a permanent impression on the ether. The air becomes a recording device, one vast library on whose pages are forever written all that man has ever said or whispered. Compare this to the book, The Music of the Spheres. The System of Dr. Tar and Professor Feather, published in November of 1845 in Graham's Ladies and Gentlemen's Magazine, is a dark comedy short story centering on a naive and unnamed narrator whose visit to a mental institution, more accurately, a maison de santé in the southern provinces of France. It's known for a revolutionary new method of treating mental illness called the system of soothing. Under this system, patients are granted a great deal of freedom, wearing everyday clothing and allowed to move freely throughout the house and grounds. The doctors and staff do not contradict any delusions that patients may exhibit, but rather encourage them as fully as possible. For example, a man who believes he is a chicken may be given only corn and gravel to eat for a week in order to break his pattern of delusional thoughts. Monsieur Maillard notes that the system has some disadvantages, which have led to the abandonment at all maison de santé in France in favor of a treatment system he has devised. The narrator remarks that after the patient revolt is crushed, the soothing system is reinstated at the asylum he has visited, though modified in certain ways that are intended to reform it. Given the interest in asylum reform, remembering that our word Bedlam comes from the nickname of the London psychiatric institution, Bethlehem Royal Hospital, the discovery that the inmates are running the asylum was a certain inspiration to Ken Kesey's novel One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest more than a century later. And Poe's interest in galvanism led to his prediction of electroshock therapy as a standard treatment for schizophrenia and other mental aberrations, 95 years before its actual implementation in psychiatric hospitals. In December of 1845, the facts in the case of M. Valdemar appeared in the American Whig Review. It's a proto-zombie story in which a man on the threshold of death is hypnotized or mesmerized to continue living as the undead. Poe is again lampooning the junk science of his day, as the story was published as a true account and not a work of fiction, regarding an attempt to put a patient into a hypnotic state at the moment of death. Poe was taking direct inspiration from the hypotheses of the previously mentioned physician Franz Mesmer, who used mesmerism similar to hypnosis to treat his patients. This process goes on for 7 months, and Valdemar is checked daily, but his vital signs, pulse, heartbeat, and breathing, register nothing, and he is cold and pale. He is asked questions, but responds with difficulty, and then begs the doctor to awaken him or put him back to sleep. When Valdemar shouts, "Dead, dead," the narrator brings him out of a trance, and Valdemar decomposes quickly into a nearly liquid mass of loathsome, of detestable putrescence. The story was written so realistically that many readers are not sure whether it was fiction or not. When a reader asked Poe if the story was a hoax, he playfully replied, quote, "Hoax is precisely the word suited to M. Valdemar's case. Some few persons believe it, but I do not, and don't you." Eureka, an essay on the material and spiritual universe, was published in New York by George Putnam in June 1848. It is Poe's last major work and his longest nonfiction work, at nearly 40,000 words. The work had its origins in a lecture Poe presented on February 3rd, 1848, titled On the Cosmography of the Universe at the Society Library in New York. Eureka seems to contain the science fiction traditions he had used in works like Manuscript Found in a Bottle and the facts in the case of M. Valdemar. He further emphasizes the connection between his theory and fiction by saying that the universe itself is a written work. Poe's wife, Virginia, had died the previous year. His aunt and mother-in-law, Maria Clem, was his sole support and audience for new works, and he used to walk with her, explaining his ideas and asking if she understood. American and British audiences have never fully appreciated this swan song, but the French have paid attention to its premonitions of the future. Poe's scientific premises were threefold, dealing with Keplerian physics on the orbits of planets, the Newtonian laws of gravity and motion, and Laplace's wave theory of light and nebular hypothesis, bringing into focus his belief in the, quote, primeval atom. Malanta Tauta, appeared in February of 1849 in Godey's Lady's Book. The title is Greek for Things That Are in the Future, and it's a satirical dystopian story set in the 29th century, the year 2848 to be exact. This short story was featured in the first edition of Hugo Gernsback's Amazing Stories that was mentioned earlier. Poe died later that year, and it's fitting that this, one of his final published works, focuses on the fleeting and faulty nature of memory. Melona Talta begins by reworking the letter Poe quoted at the start of Eureka. Its narrator, Pundita, pens a rambling letter to a friend while moving at remarkable speed via a balloon. You see a recurring theme here? A voyage that seems fantastic to the reader, but odious to the bored traveler. As Pundita's mind wanders from topic to topic, the reader learns more about the future and how little its citizens understand of our shared past and values. Poe's wicked humor and pointed criticisms of everything from the politics to the fashions of the day can make it challenging for the reader, which itself is something of an irony, given its theme of how quickly we lose touch with the past. But Melona Talta is well worth the effort because Poe leaves us with a couple of sobering and timeless takeaways. One, that the idea that we are, in our complacency, assume are permanent or at least long-term, are in fact ephemeral if we don't take pains to preserve them and the history that informs them. And second, the belief that people naturally will become better can be a dangerous thing. Just 6 months before his death, Poe published Von Kempelen and His Discovery and the Flag of Our Union in April 1849. It summarizes Poe's excursions into the existence of hoaxes and their perpetrators and supporters. This focuses on the newspaper retelling the life of Von Kempelen and his strange discovery. This is written as if it were a real news article, and even mentions that it was written by Mr. Poe. Not much is known about Von Kempelen and his life. What we know is that he was struggling to survive on the little money he could earn from working. It retells the scene where police officers were searching his house after he came into a fortune unexpectedly. What they found was a mysterious contraption that could turn lead into gold. The year the story was written came during a period of restless activity. Oh, sorry about that.
Let's see. Yeah, you don't want to-
All right, sorry about that. Well, I'll start again. What they found was a mysterious contraption that could turn lead into gold. The year the story was written came during a period of restless activity as Poe's countrymen were flocking to California after the discovery of gold. You'll recall that Wolfgang von Kempelen was involved in that other famous hoax, the mechanical chess player, which was a source of inquiry by Poe. Constructed and unveiled in 1770 by Kempelen to impress Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, the mechanism appeared to be able to play a strong game of chess against a human opponent, as well as perform the knight's tour, a puzzle that requires the player to move a knight to occupy every square of a chessboard exactly once. Although fascinated with the advances in science and technology, Poe was doubtful of humanity's progress via science. Poe did not want creative intuition sacrificed in the name of scientific reasoning. He believed truly creative scientific thinking required the intuitive imagination of a poet. When a friend commented on mankind's advancement towards perfection, Poe responded that, quote, "Man is now only more active, not wiser, nor more happy than he was 6,000 years ago," unquote. Despite his ambivalence towards science, Poe's experimentation with the themes of man's relationship to the universe clearly established him as one of the earliest science fiction writers. What strikes one when reading these stories is how easily Edgar Allan Poe makes it for the reader to suspend disbelief by making all the goings-on and explanations sound commonplace, and more importantly, plausible and believable, indeed markers of good science fiction. A poet foremost, with extraordinary vision, a critic and editor, a great storyteller, and a master of the art of the short story, Edgar Allan Poe lived a hard life and never got his due during his lifetime, in more ways than one. As unfortunate in death as he was in life, just a few months after he turned 40, Poe was found in a delirious condition in a Baltimore street, in mysterious circumstances, wearing someone else's clothes, and would pass away on October 7th, 1849. Today, more than a century and a half after his death, you can find Poe anthologies in every self-respecting bookstore. Universally hailed as one of the greatest short story authors who ever lived, it is a great joy to see Poe being enjoyed and discovered with pleasure by each new generation of readers. But when it comes to science fiction, that most ubiquitous and popular genre has gone mainstream. The name of Edgar Allan Poe is seldom mentioned in the same breath as Mary Shelley, Jules Verne, or H.G. Wells when speaking of the people who played a major role in birthing the literature of ideas and to whom we owe modern science fiction. The editor of Factor Daily's New World Weekly then concludes on a hopeful note, just as much as the Encyclopedia of Science Fiction's entry about Edgar Allan Poe ends. Quote, if his career had lasted longer, he might have awoken us more inescapably to his vision. As it stands, we must awaken ourselves to him. Well, this concludes our overview of Poe's foray into the world of science fiction. If you want to delve deeper into the subject, I recommend these two books. The Science Fiction of Edgar Allan Poe, published by Penguin Classics, with Poe-inspired cover artwork by Odilon Redon, and The Reasons for the Darkness of the Night, Edgar Allan Poe and the Forging of American Science by John Tresh. If you want to add a little cross-sensory stimulation to your quest, you can listen to this CD by the Alan Parsons Project, Tales of Mystery and Imagination, a musical and spoken word interpretation of some of Poe's immortal stories. And on a whimsical note, here's an illustrated mashup of Poe and Mad Magazine's poster boy, Alfred E. Neuman. And I have one further reading recommendation, a book that came out last year, A Mystery of Mysteries, The Death and Life of Edgar Allan Poe by Mark Dawidziak. It's not limited to the discussion of Poe's science fiction, but it does provide the reader with an illuminating viewpoint of an author whose life and work continue to fascinate, inspire, and puzzle us to this day. Well, I thank you all for tuning into this presentation.
Why don't you
I would sign out.
question and answer?
I don't know.
Okay, so why don't you bring that other chair over and we'll get into the chair here. Thank you, Wolf. Now that was very entertaining and enlightening. So let me get out of share. I have to take my glove off here. Getting out of share so that we can do questions and answers from our audience. And I'm sure that could you please raise your hand if you have a question for Wolf?
Or comment.
Or comment. And I see a hand there. Go ahead, Alice.
Kind of a question comment. I've read that Edgar Allan Poe is credited with being one of the first short story writers, if not the first short story writer. And that also is an important thing for the history of science fiction because science fiction is very dependent, very focused on writers of short stories. Do you agree with that, or have you thought about that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you recall that most of the great works of fiction of the day were pretty long and rambling. And when you talk about science fiction, you kind of have to include the other genres of fantasy and horror because they do tend to overlap quite a bit. I mean, you could make an argument for Frankenstein being science fiction or fantasy or horror, depending upon your scientific bent. And many of the works that I guess engendered the science fiction, fantasy, and horror genre were also considered Gothic romances, and they tended to be long and rambling. But Poe really, I compare him to Harlan Ellison because Harlan Ellison also loved the short stories, and he very rarely wrote any fiction longer than about 20,000 words. It seemed like he deliberately tried to avoid it because he wanted to make a point with drawing everything to a conclusion very quickly, almost like a twist ending or something that O. Henry did. He was a master of the twist ending, and to make that work, you have to keep your items relatively short. It also, it's like the genre of horror. It's very hard to sustain horror over a novel the length of a novel. Horror seems to work better as a short story. Now, obviously, there are exceptions to everything, but I would agree with you that Poe was the first to take the short story to its pinnacle.
I see something in the chat. Well, let's see if I could open that. Come on, it's a little hard when I'm not seated in front of it. I think I can do it. There's chat. Let's see if it's a question. Not recording. Oh, it's just Bob saying not recording. All right. Any other questions, comments, or kudos for the
Kudos.
presentation?
Well done.
Kudos.
With a pie.
Yay, look at all those hands clapping. Yeah, we really had a good one. And I think this one is the keeper, and we should have lots of people using it in their classes that they give on lifelong learning and such things. So we will hope this is of use to the educator part of our audience. I think I saw Chris's hand. Chris, was that your hand?
I was clapping. Very
Oh,
good.
oh,
Thank
happy,
you.
yeah. There, it's Chris and Bob are old buddies, so he's probably happy that Chris is here to be part of this.
Oh, I can't see them. How come we can see them?
How
but
come we don't see
Why
you,
are
Chris?
there 3 black screens?
Because they don't have their
Just don't
video.
have my video on, but I'm
Uh-huh.
here.
Yeah, you have to hit it. They may not want to be seen.
Well, if you're in your underwear,
their
maybe it's good to keep
yes.
it not turned on.
So anyway, this is a great one. I'm very pleased with this one. I'm going to put out a special announcement to the whole science fiction list. Come and see it if you missed it, which they did. But you'll see many more views in the days to come. So by tomorrow, I should have it up. Maybe even later today, but surely tomorrow. And for our next month, we're having. Gosh, I can't think of his name. Oh dear. I think don't quote me on this. It begins with an M. It's Milburn or something like that. He's a man who has dealt with resilient children. And there's a whole genre of science fiction of people that are ugly ducklings. They're not appreciated. They're outcasts. And then they are resilient children. It turns out they have super sensory perception or abilities in their minds. And so we're going to focus on that, and also urban life and how many children are given not a fair shake in terms of the prediction of their cognitive development because they grew up in an industrial area. And this puts that to the question and interrogates that assumption of the sanctified farmer and the rural always developing at a greater rate than the people who by misfortune grow up in an industrial environment. So we are living in industry. We aren't probably going back unless we blow ourselves up. So it's good to know that these old assumptions don't necessarily hold water. And if I'll get it out to you with the correct name, and I'm going to be collaborating with him creating this Zoom. So it will be about resilient children as the protagonists of science fiction. And that will be February let me get my dates here. February the 3rd, I believe. And we are happy to have you come or view it either way, and glad that you all came. So thank you very much. Are there any other comments or whatever? Looks like not. So once again, from Wolf and us.
Bob, my dad has a question in the chat.
No, that was just that we weren't recording.
No, there's a
new
comment.
It's a new one. Is there a new question? He can just say his questions.
It's more a comment.
It's in the other room. I mean, he can. Oh, okay. Here's a comment from my husband, Bob. And you can read it in chat. I will read it to you in case you have trouble accessing the chat. Some people do. The reason for the darkness of night refers to Poe's offering of an explanation for Olbers' paradox. Why is the night sky dark? If the number of stars were infinite, then every line of sight would intersect the photosphere, a star. So Poe posited that the reason for the dark night sky was that the universe was not infinitely old, And the finite speed of light would not have allowed the light of all the from all the stars yet. Y'all following that? That's my husband, the astronomer, speaking. Okay, so we have all the different, well, many different fields represented here, intersected by Poe. So as I was going to say, anything else, Wolf?
No, like I said, it's hard to cover a lot of material in the time we have allotted. I know it
Well, you can
probably.
come back. You can make this an ongoing saga
I say I would,
and then turn it into a
go
book.
back and look at the video, and if you do want to explore this further, read those books that I recommended. They truly will give you a broader understanding than just the surface that I was able to deliver today. I know I didn't go into much depth about each one, but
I think you covered so much, they're gonna have to view this video 5 times just to get what you did say. So anyway, everyone, I hope you all have a very happy new year and come back next month, because this thing about children being resilient resonates with all these war zones and all these poor places where people live, and it's not pristine and rustic. So, children do flourish in these places. That's important to know. And we'll see you then. Happy New Year.
Okay.
Happy
bye.
New Year. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
And I'm
Bye.
gonna to get out. So if you want to leave
Bye.
individually, you may. Bye-bye, Chris.
Hi, and
Bye-bye,
thank you
everybody.
all. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thanks for coming, Sharon.
Well, thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.